A ragged scream pierced the abandoned farmhouse, echoing against crumbling walls as Emily whispered, "Daniel, did you hear that?" Daniel felt his chest tighten as the dragging sound grew louder. Laura said, "Don't move, don't even breathe." The metallic tang of blood filled the cold night air. Shadows stretched unnaturally as broken boards creaked under unseen weight. Suddenly the sound stopped. Emily whispered, "Someone is here watching us." The whisper of a name slid through the doorway, hoarse and deliberate. Daniel shivered as he realized the voice spoke his name. The farmhouse fell silent, but silence carried weight. Emily whispered, "It knows us." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, though the night was bitter cold. Laura muttered broken prayers, rocking in place. The boards creaked with deliberate rhythm. Each sound reminded them the house wasn't empty. A shadow moved where no one stood. Emily whispered, "It wants us to follow." Daniel felt his breath shorten, his chest heavy, as if invisible fingers pressed down. The voice whispered again, faint and closer. On a cracked table rested an unfinished canvas. Emily whispered, "Who painted this?" The brushstrokes captured a stranger's face, but its lifeless eyes stared at Daniel. Laura gasped, "That's a dead man." Daniel leaned closer, unsettled by the uncanny realism. Emily felt the air grow heavy, her throat tightening as if the painting itself exhaled. The candles flickered violently. Laura screamed, "It's him!" "The scream we heard belongs to him." Daniel recoiled as the face seemed to twitch in the dim glow. Daniel whispered, "This is impossible." Emily replied, "We're not alone, and it wants us to see." Laura clutched the rosary tighter, her lips quivering with each whispered prayer. The painting's expression shifted, eyes hollow and accusing. The air thickened like smoke, choking their lungs. Emily's voice cracked. "What if each face is one of them?" Daniel looked at her, dread sinking into his bones. Laura collapsed to her knees, whispering, "They're all dead." And he painted them. A faint thud echoed, closer now, dragging across the hallway. Emily whispered, "It's coming here." Daniel gripped the iron bar again, his arms trembling. Laura pressed her forehead to the floorboards, whispering prayers like a chant. The unfinished painting began to drip crimson, though no brush touched it. The smell of iron filled the air. Daniel whispered, "This house remembers every death." The whisper came again, louder, raspy, unmistakable, Emily's name this time. The farmhouse felt heavier as dawn threatened, but never arrived. Emily whispered, "Daniel, why would anyone paint them like this?" Daniel answered, "These faces, they belong to the missing." Laura pressed her trembling hands against the rosary, whispering prayers. A draft carried the smell of damp earth and blood. The unfinished canvas now showed a new detail, the corner darkening with a second figure. Emily gasped, "He isn't finished." Daniel's pulse thundered as he realized the painter was alive, somewhere near, compelled to immortalize each victim forever. A knock echoed from the outer door, slow and deliberate. Emily froze, her breath ragged. Daniel whispered, "Stay back." The door creaked open to reveal a man in a tattered coat, his eyes sharp and knowing. He introduced himself as Richard, a traveler who claimed to know the farmhouse secret. Laura muttered, "You should not be here." Richard smiled faintly and said, "The artist is cursed, and so are you for seeing his work." Emily shuddered as his words fell heavy, echoing louder than the creaks. On the table, another canvas leaned against the wall. Emily gasped, "That's him." The painting revealed a boy, pale and lifeless with hollow eyes. Daniel whispered, "This is one of the missing." Laura cried, rocking back and forth. They screamed through paint. Richard smirked and said, "Each victim is preserved by brush, unwilling and eternal." Emily felt bile rise as she swore. The painted lips twitched. Daniel staggered, unable to deny the boy's image matched a photograph from an old newspaper tacked to the wall. Daniel shouted, "Enough lies," but Richard calmly replied, "You'll believe soon." Emily whispered, "Please stop." Laura clutched the rosary until her fingers bled. The painting shifted. The boy's eyes seemed to follow them. Daniel's skepticism faltered as he remembered reports of children disappearing. Richard said, "You think this is brush and paint? It's blood." Emily backed away as dripping noises filled the air, though no one touched the canvas. Laura screamed as the boy's painted tears turned crimson, streaking down the surface. The dragging sound returned, louder, closer. Emily pressed against Daniel, whispering, "It's coming back." Laura sobbed, "It knows we see them." Richard whispered calmly, "He paints what he kills, and he never stops." Daniel clenched his fists, rage cutting through fear. The farmhouse walls groaned as if alive, shadows stretching unnaturally. Emily gasped as the blood trail thickened toward the door. The whisper rose again, this time layered with many voices speaking their names. Laura dropped to her knees, screaming, "We're next." Daniel ran his hand across the old canvas, leaning against the wall, his face pale as he whispered, "These are real." Emily shook her head, trembling. "They are all victims." Laura pressed her rosary, crying, "I warned you not to look." Richard stepped closer with a grim smile, saying, "Every painting here matches an unsolved murder." Emily gasped as she saw the familiar features of a woman reported missing years ago. Daniel muttered, "We are trapped inside a gallery of the dead." The air turned colder as Richard leaned against the doorframe, whispering, "The painter isn't gone. He lingers here." Emily whispered, "Who is he?" Laura clutched Daniel's sleeve, her voice breaking. "He's the one who took them." The floor creaked, and a tall shadow slithered across the wall, though no one moved. Daniel said, "We need to leave." Richard chuckled darkly. "You can't, not until he finishes his work." Emily stepped back, fear flooding her eyes as the shadow grew larger. The silence broke with a whisper from the darkness. Laura gasped, "It knows our names." Emily whispered, "It spoke mine." Daniel shouted into the black, "Show yourself." Richard laughed faintly. "He doesn't show, he paints." Emily's knees buckled as she stared at another canvas uncovered in the corner, showing a man's face twisted in horror. Laura wailed, "That's my neighbor, he disappeared last winter." Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief, his grip tightening on the bar. The canvas shimmered as if wet paint moved. A faint tapping echoed, rhythmic like a brush against canvas. Emily whispered, "It's painting now." Daniel growled, "We're being hunted." Laura fell to her knees, begging, "Please stop this." Richard leaned close and murmured, "The paintings feed him." Emily saw another face emerging on the canvas, strokes appearing where no hand moved. Daniel's chest tightened as the figure resembled him. Laura screamed, "It's painting you." Emily pulled him back, terror filling her voice as the eyes of the painted Daniel began to glow. Daniel staggered, clutching his chest, feeling his breath shorten as if the painting pulled life from him. Emily cried, "It's taking him." Laura pressed the rosary to Daniel's shoulder, whispering broken prayers. Richard whispered smugly, "He paints what he will claim." Emily shouted, "Why us?" Richard's eyes glimmered as he answered, "Because you found his gallery." The air trembled with unseen energy as the brushstrokes quickened, completing Daniel's painted eyes. Daniel gasped, "If he finishes, I die here." Emily stumbled back as another canvas slid forward, revealing a young girl's face, pale and lifeless. Laura shrieked. She was from the church choir. Daniel whispered, "He paints every victim." Richard stepped closer, his voice calm and cruel. "She sang once, now she screams forever." Emily's tears blurred her vision as the girl's painted lips seemed to part in silence. Daniel clenched his jaw, his rage trembling beneath fear. Laura sobbed violently, whispering, "He won't stop until we're all on these walls." Daniel shouted, "We have to destroy these paintings." But Richard's laughter filled the room. Emily begged, "Please, don't let him finish." Laura raised her trembling hand, clutching the rosary tightly. Richard's smile turned sharp as he hissed, "One of you already serves him." Emily gasped, "What are you saying?" Daniel's eyes darted toward Richard, anger flashing. "You're lying!" Laura sobbed, rocking back and forth. Richard whispered, "One of you brought him here." The farmhouse groaned as if the accusation itself awakened something. The farmhouse shook as Emily whispered, "Who is it?" Richard's voice cut sharp, "The one who doubted the most." Daniel froze, anger boiling. "You mean me?" Laura gasped. "Daniel, no do so." Richard smiled with venom. "Your disbelief fed him." Every denial painted a stroke. Emily stepped between them, screaming, "Stop blaming him." Daniel felt his chest tighten as the painted version of himself flickered alive on the canvas. Laura cried, "He's already claimed you." Daniel's fists trembled as fear and guilt consumed him. The unfinished canvases began to shift, their faces twisting as if screaming silently. Emily cried, "They're alive." Laura clutched her chest, wailing, "They're trapped souls." Daniel shouted, "We must end this." Richard stepped closer, voice dripping with mockery, "Break one, and you release them into you." Emily's heart raced as she backed away from the canvases. Daniel's rage clashed with terror, his knuckles white as he raised the iron bar. Laura screamed, "Don't touch it!" The air pulsed as the painted eyes glowed brighter. Daniel swung the bar, striking the nearest canvas. A piercing shriek erupted, not from paint but from the walls themselves. Emily covered her ears, crying, "What have you done?" Laura collapsed, whispering broken prayers. Richard grinned wide, his voice rising, "You freed one, now it hunts you." Daniel stumbled back, his face pale with dread. The canvas bled thick crimson, dripping onto the floorboards. Emily whispered, "They're not dead. They're waiting." Laura's sobs filled the farmhouse as shadows began to crawl across the floor. The farmhouse trembled as shadows spilled across the walls. Emily whispered, "Something is here." Daniel raised the iron bar, sweat dripping from his forehead. Laura prayed louder, clutching her rosary until her knuckles turned white. Richard's grin widened, whispering, "The creature feeds on fear." A low growl echoed, vibrating through the rotting beams. Emily pressed closer to Daniel, trembling as the air grew thick. Laura screamed, "It's watching us." The canvases flickered, their faces shifting. Daniel whispered, "We face it now." The back door slammed open though no wind blew. Emily gasped, "It's inside." Daniel's grip tightened on the bar, his chest rising sharply. Laura's voice cracked, "Lord, protect us." A figure emerged in the darkness, tall and shapeless, its form shifting like smoke. Richard whispered, "He has come." Emily felt the floor shake beneath her feet, boards bending under unseen weight. Daniel muttered, "We fight or die." The creature's glowing eyes pierced through the dark, locking on each of them. The air filled with whispers, voices of the painted dead. Emily clutched her chest, crying, "They're speaking to us." Daniel swung the bar wildly as shadows lunged. Laura collapsed, chanting louder, "Deliver us!" Richard laughed, "They will never leave you." The canvases bled crimson, dripping onto the floor. Emily screamed as the young girl's painted face twisted and her voice echoed, "Help me." Daniel staggered under the weight of unseen hands. Laura wept, trembling on the floor. Richard's laughter grew louder. Daniel fell to his knees, gasping as the painted version of him grew clearer on the canvas. Emily shouted, "He's taking your soul." Laura sobbed, pressing her rosary to Daniel's shoulder. Richard sneered, "The moment he finishes, Daniel belongs to him." Emily shook her head, crying, "We can't let it happen." The canvas glowed brighter, brushstrokes appearing by themselves. Daniel whispered, "He's almost done." Laura screamed louder, shaking as the rosary slipped from her hands. The creature loomed closer, stretching its dark arms. The room shook violently as the creature leaned forward, shadow arms reaching toward Daniel. Emily screamed, "Fight him!" Daniel roared, swinging the iron bar with desperate strength. Laura wailed, "He won't let go." Richard whispered coldly, "It's already written." The iron bar struck the glowing canvas, shattering it in a burst of blood and light. Emily fell back as the creature shrieked, its form splitting apart. Daniel gasped, "It's not over." Laura cried in despair, "He's only growing stronger." Shadows surged toward them. The farmhouse quaked as the creature towered over them, its form rippling like smoke but heavier than stone. Emily screamed, "We cannot fight this." Daniel lifted the iron bar again, shouting, "We must!" Laura fell flat to the floor, clutching her rosary with trembling hands. Richard whispered with glee, "He is nearly complete." The painted Daniel stared back from the canvas, its eyes glowing brighter. Emily pulled at Daniel's arm, sobbing, "Don't let him finish!" The creature's shadow swallowed the room. The air cracked like thunder as the canvases shook violently. Emily cried, "They're breaking free!" Laura's voice wavered, "The dead are calling." Daniel's chest heaved as blood dripped from his nose, the canvas draining his life. Richard laughed, "You are his masterpiece." Emily grabbed the rosary from Laura's hand and pressed it against the glowing painting. A hiss erupted, smoke rising. Daniel gasped, "It burns him." Laura screamed louder, her voice drowning in chaos. The creature shrieked, rattling the beams above. Emily sobbed, "We must destroy them all." Daniel whispered, "It will kill me." Laura clutched his arm, crying, "Better death than possession." Richard hissed, "Break them, and you free the rage within." The canvases pulsed, faces wailing in agony. Daniel's hands shook, torn between survival and sacrifice. Emily shouted, "Do it now!" Laura's tears fell onto the wood, staining it darker. Daniel raised the bar high, his body trembling. Richard stepped closer, sneering, "He is already yours." The canvas screamed louder. Daniel swung with all his strength, smashing the painted canvas. A blinding light exploded, throwing Emily against the wall. Laura shrieked as blood splattered across her dress. Richard stumbled back, screaming, "You fool!" Creature roared, its form splitting in two. Emily gasped, "It's weakening." Daniel collapsed to his knees, exhausted. Laura wailed, "Finish it." The other canvases rattled violently, their frames cracking. Shadows poured from the broken painting, swirling like a storm. Richard shouted, "You unleashed him." The house shook violently. Emily crawled toward Daniel, whispering, "You cannot give up." Daniel's eyes burned with determination as he struggled back to his feet. Laura raised her trembling hands toward the creature, praying louder than ever before. Richard bared his teeth, shouting, "He will take you all." The shadow surged, covering the ceiling like a wave. Daniel lifted the bar one final time, roaring, "Then he takes me last." The creature shrieked as the canvases shattered one by one, each scream shaking the farmhouse. Emily sobbed, "End this." The farmhouse lay in silence after the collapse, dust swirling in pale moonlight. Emily whispered, "Daniel, are you alive?" Daniel coughed weakly, "Still here." Laura sobbed with relief, pressing her hands over her chest. Richard stood, his face pale but smiling. He said, "He isn't gone, he never leaves." Emily shook her head, trembling, "We destroyed him." Richard laughed faintly, whispering, "You only fed him." Daniel staggered to his feet, anger simmering. Laura whispered broken prayers as the shadows flickered back across the walls. Emily gasped as she saw fresh canvases leaning against the broken beams. Daniel muttered, "No, he's still painting." Laura clutched her rosary, crying, "It cannot be." Richard whispered gleefully, "The brush never stops." Emily stepped closer, her face pale, and screamed, "It's us!" Each canvas bore their likeness, brushstrokes wet and gleaming. Daniel's voice broke, "He's already claimed our faces." Laura fell to her knees, weeping, "We are the next victims." The air thickened, pressing against their lungs as the paintings pulsed faintly. Daniel shouted, "We can still fight." Emily cried, "He's already inside the paintings." Laura whispered, "We are trapped." Richard's voice rose darkly, "You can't fight canvas and blood." The faces on the paintings began to blink slowly, their painted eyes opening. Emily shrieked, "They're alive!" Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, this isn't real." Laura sobbed louder, pressing her face into her hands. Richard whispered, "This is eternity." The farmhouse groaned, as if the walls themselves breathed with the painting's life. Emily pulled Daniel's hand, screaming, "We must run." Daniel shook his head. "He will follow." Laura wailed, "There's nowhere safe." "Richard," said calmly, "he owns your faces now." The painted Daniel whispered from the canvas, "You cannot escape me." Emily's chest heaved as she dragged Laura toward the door. Daniel roared, smashing one canvas, but it bled thick crimson, soaking the floor. Laura collapsed, whispering, "We're cursed." Richard smiled wider, whispering, "He paints forever." The farmhouse shook violently as the shadows thickened. The house fell silent again, but silence was heavier than screams. Emily whispered, "Please, let it end." Daniel's face turned pale as he glanced back at the canvases. Their painted eyes followed them, glowing faintly. Laura clutched her rosary, whispering prayers without words. Richard's voice echoed even as he vanished. "He never stops painting." Emily cried softly, trembling. The final sound was a brushstroke against canvas, slow and deliberate. From the darkness a hoarse whisper spoke their names together. Then everything went black.